Hello, everybody. This is Ozan Avunduk, and today we're going to talk with Hekmat Aboukhater, Syrian-American journalist. Hikmet, I'm glad to host you today.
Thank you for hosting me. And I am a Syrian American. I worked with a bunch of journalist outlets. I worked with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, a think tank in the US. And I currently live in Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up in Aleppo, Syria, up until 2015.
Did you expect the revival of Syrian conflict?
Somewhat, I expected it because of a lot of us that were paying attention to the situation on the ground in Syria were noticing the weakness of the central state in Syria. We're realizing also that there was a lot of inter-alliance, inter-allegiance conflict within the alliance that was defending Syria and protecting it from incursion. So on one point, the US imposed economic sanctions, succeeded in weakening the central government, in essentially freezing the conflict, freezing the Syrian economy. So a lot of Syrian people realized that the economic suffering that they were undergoing on a daily basis is due in part to the United States and the European Union and the harsh sanctions regime imposed on Syria, but they also attributed this suffering, this economic downturn, to the authority directly above them, which is the Syrian government. And considering the point on the inter-allegiance dissent and dissonance that was taking place, the United Arab Emirates have been courting the Syrian government since 2018. They reestablished diplomatic ties with the Syrian government, and they slowly succeeded in getting the other Gulf monarchs, excluding Qatar, to reestablish contact with Damascus. So the one caveat that was somewhat agreed upon by Damascus in order to start getting diplomatic contact with Riyadh, with Abu Dhabi, was that the Iranians needed to slowly get out of the country. So I think Assad government made a mistake in prematurely agreeing to such terms, being enticed by the idea that the Saudi government, the Emirati government would slowly start improving relations with Damascus and would use their tremendous influence in Washington to help Syria get out of the war. But they didn't, I think Damascus and Assad's people didn't get enough serious agreements signed. They didn't get enough of a promise that this will be the case because they started acting prematurely. You saw a lot of tension with Iran in the last couple of months before this latest development. You saw a lot of tension with the Russians, and you saw overtures made by the Syrian government towards Riyadh. You saw that the Saudi embassy opened its embassy in Damascus for the first time in 12 years, if I believe correctly, if I know correctly. In 12 years, we've never had a Saudi embassy, but it opened 6 months ago. So these changes happened, again, in my opinion, prematurely. They throw a wrench into the developments in the Syrian context. There was a lot of tension that was, of course, coming from the West because of Lebanon's situation, a lot of tension coming from the South because of the Gaza, the October 7th war that was taking place. Of course, Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated. He was a great supporter of the Syrian regime. And then, as you know, the Russian government is semi-broke and they're preoccupied in Ukraine, and they simply can't afford to keep the Syrian government afloat. Iran, ever since Raisi's helicopter crash, Pezeshkian has showed that he is uninterested, that he is unwilling to commit the same way that Raisi committed. He is not willing to invest in Syria and engage in the strength of the axis of resistance. He seems like he's appeasing the West. He's trying to re-engage with the JCPOA, trying to find a way to negotiate through the UN, through other institutions in New York and Washington to find an agreement where they would limit the nuclear program in Iran. And all that to say is that he has shown that he is not invested in the war in Syria. And that is playing out, I think, now in the streets of Syria.
Thank you very much, Hikmet, for painting the big picture. So, do you think with the advancements now of Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and Syrian National Army in Aleppo and Hama, would it be correct to say now that the Syrian government already collapsed, or is it too early?
As of now, it's still unclear because Homs has yet to fall, the main city that is connecting between the Alawite Shia coast in Latakia and Tartus and Damascus, the capital. Assad is still in Damascus. Yes, it looks bad. There's no denying that. It looks awful, actually. The speed with which Aleppo fell and then Hama fell, and now Daraa, Suwaida, the provinces of the north, of the south, I mean, so just south of Damascus, have fallen as well to the control of the opposition groups. And it doesn't seem clear that the traditional allies of the Syrian government are going to fly in and save the day. So it looks bad as of now, but also we need to remember that the entire Western media apparatus has funded this propagandistic campaign essentially against Syria, and everyone wants to see a fall of the Syrian government. So I would be wary of what I read online, essentially.
My next question was going to be, what were you referring when you said propaganda? But you're mainly talking about then Western media coverage of the situation in Syria.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who is in the Telegram channels of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, like myself, I'm in their Telegram channels and I see the incredibly high production value that they have. Like, in some of the videos that they are posting also from Telegram to Twitter and elsewhere, you see that they have entire media rooms in Idlib, that province, that enclave that is
Yeah,
under their control since 2016.
I guess strikes are
They
going on, by the way, right? Excuse me, but like the Russian strikes
Yeah,
are still going on Idlib, as
yeah,
far as
yeah.
I know.
They Russian strikes are ongoing, but to the point about propaganda is they seem very, very well funded. Like every time they go out and make a speech, there are multiple screens behind them. Their press teams are very well equipped. They have top tier technology. So it's clear that this funding is not born innately from Idlib. It's And there's no denying that the Western capitals, from Paris to London to Washington, have wanted regime change in Syria since the start of the Arab Spring. And now it seems that they might finally achieve it.
That reminds also the high quality of footage published by ISIS back then, back in the war days. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, a couple of years ago. What's the link between this so-called Syrian National Army and the HTS? Would you give us your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a very interesting link because they've been in a state of internal civil war for a while. Just last summer, when Turkey made some overtures towards the Syrian government, and it seemed like they have internal strife that is unsurmountable. The SNA, as you described it, is Turkish-led. The Syrian National Army, it's Syrian in name only. The control is coming from Ankara. The HTS is the remnants of every single Islamist group that fought in Syria since 2011 up until 2016. They were all consolidated and they were bussed up to Idlib, the only province that was still under the control of the Free Syrian Army, so to speak. So it's a consolidation of all the deserting ISIS fighters. It's a consolidation of the Turkish Islamic Party, which are the Uyghurs, who have operations in Idlib as of now. And they are the consolidation of other Uzbeks, Tajiks, Pakistanis, Albanians, essentially anyone who came in on a religious ideological mission to fight and die in Syria. Those are the people who are now consolidated under the flag of the Tawheed flag of HTS, of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And their leader is Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who was the founder of Jabhat al-Nusra, and before that, he was a founder of al-Qaeda in Syria. And now he's the one who is leading this new incursion. He's the one figurehead that remains. There's a leader in the SNA. His name is Abu Amsha. He's famous as well. And that was the other leader of the SNA, that there was a infighting between Abu Amsha and the Jolani. But surprisingly, little has been heard of Abu Amsha. Abu Amsha has had little to say or little to do with the latest incursions into the Syrian government-controlled areas. I see him going in and swooping in if Abu Muhammad al-Jolani is not accepted by the Western leaders. If Western leaders say, like, we can't work with that because HTS at the end of the day is still designated as a terrorist organization in Washington and Paris, what will happen is Abu Amsha, even though he's credibly accused of rape and killing people in Idlib, he will also be rehabilitated in one way or another by the Turks to take over control and lead some form of transitional period.
Could we describe the ideology of the whole Syrian National Army, also called as the opponents or rebels, as a jihadist movement, or do they include other elements as well, more secular leaning ideology as well?
So the leadership certainly is jihadist and must be described in that way. In specifically now, as we push back against this Western propaganda narrative that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani is like a diversity candidate. They did an interview with him in CNN, and they are trying to make him sound as this like free-thinking academic type that is worried about institutions and worried about the diversity. We know where he comes from, and we know his background, and we know what his group did in Idlib. That's the main point that everyone's forgetting. Because Idlib had a very significant Christian community, an Alawite community, and a Druze community, and they've suffered a lot, and now mostly they do not exist. There's a famous New York Times article about the one Syrian Christian man who remains in Idlib. So churches were shuttered, public display of Christianity were forbidden. You can't, of course, not that this matters this much now when you're talking about such a massive historical event, but they shut down liquor stores, and the Christian population of Idlib was essentially non-existent since 2016. And anyone who, again, I encourage anyone who's doubting what I'm saying, go in and watch their own Telegram channels. Anyone who has looked at their Telegram channels knows what takes place inside Idlib. In Idlib, if you drive around, you see billboards that say that hijab is a mandatory religious command, that Shia are the enemy of Islam, that a woman without her hijab is a city without its defense lines, that your beard must not be cut, that smoking and argila are haram. So it's very evident that there's a propaganda campaign trying to rehabilitate these jihadis who are in the lead of this offensive right now. But some of us who know who they are, it just simply wouldn't work on us.
Because I saw a couple of tweets showing that HTS fighters removing Christmas trees in Aleppo. How were Christians impacted during the war, and what's their situation now? If you could elaborate just a bit more, maybe, if they're still in Syria, in which towns they are.
Though since the war started in Aleppo, there were about 300,000 Syrian Christians. That number over the years of the war has dropped to about 30,000. So it's 1/10 of what it used to be. And the situation now in Aleppo, as I told you, there's a very intentional media campaign to try and show these HTS fighters as tolerant, as moderate. So as of now, with all of the attention of Western media, all of the attention of international media, they're playing it very safe. They're showing up to Christian areas and they're handing out flowers, handing out free bread. And despite all of that, there have been infringements on the Christian community. As I tweeted, I showed one of the first things these fighters did was they brought down a Christmas tree in the middle of the Aziziyah area in Aleppo, which is the Christian heart of the Christian community. They since fixed the tree because they are very aware of this media, the media perception in the West. So they fixed the tree. Not only did they fix the tree, they filmed so many different videos with different angles of the tree to make sure that everyone knows that this tree has been fixed. And a member of that team also went out and apologized and said, "Oh, Syria is the free Syria is for all of its people. It's not just for like Sunni Muslims," essentially saying that. But with all of this media campaign, there have also been infringements. Some Christian women have been told on the street that they need to cover. A liquor store was broken into, and the bottles were filmed being torched and broken and destroyed. And again, the precedent is there. We know what the precedent is in Idlib. We saw what happened to the Christian community in Idlib, and it wasn't good. The worry amongst the Christian community that we've been speaking to is, God protect this Christian community once this honeymoon phase is over. Once the international news cycle moves on to something else. Like, for example, another escalation takes place in Gaza, and then people drive their attention away from Aleppo, away from Syria. So as of now, the situation is fine, but let's see.
I see. How about the Kurds in the north? First of all, could they maybe potentially be considered as allies of the government of the Assad regime now against the jihadists? Maybe you can start by the link between the regime and the Kurdish community and also the armed groups in the north of Syria.
It has been a very complicated relationship. Sometimes the regime has cooperated with the SDF, sometimes they have not. The one thing that has been consistent is that the SDF and the regime forces have very rarely exchanged fire during the entirety of the Syrian civil war. So there are a lot of tensions between them, but there was somewhat of a peaceful coexistence between the two groups. And there was always an understanding that at some point a deal will be struck in the Syrian government in order to consolidate control over all of the regions in the northeast, as I wrote in my article, would do somewhat of an agreement with the Kurds, and they would give them partial autonomy like they have in Iraq. That turns out to be not the case because, as we know now, Turkey has changed its mind, or not really changed its mind, but Turkey has put its foot down. They would not accept another autonomous region on their southern border. So Turkey controls Afrin, as you know. Turkey controls parts of northern Idlib. And the main purpose for that control is to divide the Kurdish areas of northern Syria and not to allow them to consolidate and prove to be a real threat to the Turkish authority in the southeast of the country. Because with a Kurdish autonomous region and all the Kurds that are in southeast Turkey, that could prove to be a national security threat, according to Erdogan, at least. So the situation as of now, there are still parts of Aleppo that are under the control, specifically Sheikh Massoud. They are still in the control, under the control of the Kurdish forces. The Kurdish forces are not being treated as delicately as other minorities, because they see the jihadis, HTS members, they see them as a clear danger, as a clear threat. They see them as an enemy. So while the HTS fighters, they treat Christian minorities with a lot of tenderness and with a delicate approach, they're not doing the same with the Kurds. They're being very harsh with them. There are videos online of them manhandling Kurdish women fighters, putting them in trucks, beating them, beating other Kurdish men, and essentially treating them harshly. So that is what the situation is currently. Mazloum Abdi, let me see, I have his tweet here. Mazloum Abdi, he's the leader of the SDF movement, the Syrian Democratic Forces. He's the leader of the Kurds. He said, blah, blah, blah. He's confirming that they've consolidated control over the northeast, because in the northeast, for the longest time, it was controlled by the SDF, but also had pockets of Syrian government control. Now all of those have been removed, and they've left willingly to either go defend Homs or defend Damascus. And now they've consolidated control. And the next step for them would be to realize that, okay, now you're facing a group that is backed by Turkey. And Turkey, one of their main goals in Syria is your destruction. So the question that remains is, will the United States allow that to happen? And as we know, with the Trump administration, they might. They might allow that to happen. Trump has never been a fan of the Kurds.
Since you're
Mhm.
based in the US and interested in US foreign policy, I'd like to dive into that aspect as well a little. In
Yep.
2019, Trump had ordered the withdrawal of US troops from Syria. So, how do you think Trump's second term in office will affect the situation in Syria?
In 2016, Trump came in with a clear mandate that he wanted to end the regime change wars, to end the forever wars that the United States was engaged in. And when he finally tried to act on that, he was rebuked and he was forced to relent by people in his cabinet, by John Bolton, James Mattis, people in his cabinet that have the same ideology of the past, the ideology of the neocons and neoconservatives. So he failed. He wanted to take the troops out of Aleppo, of Syria as a whole in 2019, 2018. He was not allowed. And in some reporting, they even lied to him. They told him, yeah, we'll bring them out, but then they kept the military installments as they were. Now the situation seems very complex, but in a sense also very clear. The reason behind this latest movement, it seems that before the final negotiations were allowed to take place, before the conclusion, so-called, of the Syrian civil war, people realized that Trump won the election almost a month ago now. And they realized, okay, considering Trump won, we know where he leans. We know that he is anti-regime change war. We know that he would want to pull out the American troops from Syria. We know that he hired his national intelligence secretary, Tulsi Gabbard, who is against the ongoing regime change operations in Syria. So maybe what happened in Idlib, in Langley, in Virginia, the CIA headquarters, they decided, okay, we have this last lame duck period of 2 months before the Biden administration departs the White House. Let's try and do one last push. Maybe we would improve our negotiating position when the final negotiation to conclude the Syrian civil war takes place. And it seems that this last push that was essentially scheduled right before Trump comes in was incredibly successful. They didn't calculate how successful it would be because, again, people underestimated how weak the Syrian government is, how weak the alliance of the Axis of Resistance has become since October 7th. So now Trump is making these announcements, as you showed me in that tweet, saying that let it play out. The United States should not be involved. After what? I mean, the United States is the first and foremost leader of everything that is taking place in Syria. The United States essentially worked with Turkey, worked with Qatar to try and get regime change. The United States, since 2011, has invested $1 billion a year, almost $100,000 per jihadi fighter in Syria to try and force regime change. They've armed the groups that are fighting in Syria against the government. And the United States' entire foreign policy is predicated on weakening the Syrian government, weakening the Axis of Resistance, and eventually, in weakening the Axis of Resistance, supporting Israel. So Syria, the United States is very much involved. That claim that they should just wait it out, Trump doesn't understand how deeply his government is involved. So that is the short summary of the things.
All right, Hekmat. Thank you so much for your insightful comments about the current situation in Syria.
Thank you, Azan. Take it easy.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.